The food industry is totally broken. There's not enough healthy, nutritious food on the market that is available enough and affordable enough for the people who need it the most. Humans need food to survive, but food costs money. But food does not exist on the market so that we can eat food. Food is sold to us so that large corporations can make money. Our need to eat food is being exploited. For some reason, food is not a right in this world, and there is no food security. Most people don't think much about how their food gets to their plate. In fact, most people just don't want to know much about their food. They just want to continue to take for granted that you can buy perfect cuts from the grocery store. They just want to poke them and sort through them without ever thinking about the fact that they're sorting through multiple remains of cows that lived tragic lives. The commodification of food has detached us from it. We need to reconnect with the food that we eat. I think people need to start raising their own animals or even hunting for their own meat, becoming more self-reliant and providing for themselves. These sorts of options are never advertised to us from the mainstream. Instead, we get rumors that they want us to eat bugs or perhaps even go vegan to save the planet. I promise you that both of these options are a lie. Eradicating conventional meat from our diet will not save the planet. But the food industry absolutely is destroying the environment, and we need to completely change the way that we cultivate food. The point of domesticating a grazing animal, the point of a cow or a goat, is that they can eat grass, sticks, leaves, thickets. They can eat things that humans cannot eat. They can take that inedible food and convert it into edible food that humans can eat, like dairy and meat. Those animals take things that have no nutritional value and convert them into things that are necessary for humans to live. If you're nomadic, if you live in a desert or a grass plain and there's next to no natural foods to forage or hunt in your environment, then you must raise grazing animals to survive. You must consume dairy and meat to survive in that wilderness. We should never switch to eating bugs as a standard over eating cattle or chicken products. Livestock consumes food that we cannot eat and then converts it into food that we can eat. Bugs, on the other hand, must consume human-grade food in order for those bugs to be edible for humans. Bugs cannot turn inedible items into edible, nutritious food. You cannot just stick a bunch of thickets and grass into a tub to feed your crickets. A cricket farmer must use human-grade corn or rice, which in my opinion completely defeats the purpose of raising the bugs in the first place. Bugs cannot transform the quality of the food that they ingest into something that benefits humanity. Bugs are not livestock. If we're growing human-grade food in the first place, it's horribly inefficient to feed that food to anything other than humans, period. Another reason we should not eat bugs en masse is because of diseases. See, for the most part, if a cow eats contaminated food and it becomes sick, well, that cow has an immune system that can fight off that disease so that we do not contract it when we consume its meat. But we also don't consume the entire cow. Most of us are pretty picky about which part of the cow we like to eat. Bugs, on the other hand, we eat in their entirety. And if a bug eats contaminated food, well, the entire bug's body will just retain that contaminant. So when we eat that bug in its entirety, we're exposing ourselves to it. A bug does not filter out any of the food through its system. Again, a bug is not livestock. Then there's the issue of parasites. You can medicate a cow against parasites and control its food source so that it does not contract new parasites. Bug farming is pretty new, to be fair, but back in 2019, they found parasites in 240 out of the 300 bug farms that were tested. That doesn't really inspire confidence. There is no way to keep parasites off of a bug farm. I know that this is a bit of a shocker to some of you, but bugs are antithetical to the concept of cleanliness. Right? Bugs will eat almost anything. They don't care if it's contaminated. They don't care if it has parasites. Livestock, on the other hand, will pick and choose what they eat out of the selection they come across. They will avoid things that they think will contaminate their blood with toxins. A goat or a cow will avoid contaminated food. They have self-preservation. Chickens are the most ethical food-producing animal to raise, by the way. They'll eat all the bugs in your garden and a chunk of your food waste, as well as produce eggs, all for the low price of whatever it costs to build a chicken coop. Everyone should raise chickens, in my opinion. Some food items on the market are a total joke, like bottom feeders. Not that long ago, lobsters were fed almost exclusively to prisoners because nobody else wanted them. Useless crustaceans that got stuck to the trolling net. But then somehow the fishing industry convinced us to eat lobster and shrimp overnight when suddenly rich people were willing to pay inflated prices for them. I love fish, especially salmon. Domesticated fish is the worst thing that you can eat. Stay away from farm fish. Domesticated salmon is the single most toxic food item that you can buy today. As for dairy, well, you technically need some dairy in your diet, especially if you are not consuming any meat at all. I hate the dairy industry though. It is genuinely the most up food industry. What they have to do to get cattle perpetually producing milk is terrible. I want to make it clear that I have respect for vegans that choose not to eat animal products, especially from a position of love for animals. But the vegan diet is not realistic or sustainable for most people. I know that some people can get by on it, but for most people, it's not realistic. Animal products are much more nutrient dense, and there are certain vitamins and nutrients that are almost exclusive to animal fat. I know that there are supplements, but supplements absorb differently into your body. Sometimes your body has to do extra work to absorb certain supplements. Vegetarians can get away with supplementing with things like butter, eggs, cheese. Those items contain vitamin A, D, B12, and K2. Without those, you cannot develop proper bone structure. And as much as I hate the dairy industry and as much as I hate milk drinkers are on average much taller than people that stay away from dairy. A study showed that 77% of vegetarians and 92% of vegans had insufficient levels of vitamin B12, but only 11% of meat eaters were deficient in B12. Even with supplements, the body can only absorb so much. But when those vitamins and nutrients come with animal fats, the body absorbs those nutrients much more efficiently and can incorporate them much more effectively. The fruit and vegetable industries have their issues too, obviously. You likely didn't realize this, but there are two completely different supply lines for grocery stores as opposed to restaurants, including different farming industries with different standards. While during the lockdowns, most of the restaurants were just shut down, but farmers weren't given a specific time frame as to how long those restaurants would be shut down, so they couldn't just stop growing their vegetables because they didn't know when they'd have to start supplying those restaurants again. But guess what? You can't just sell good food to people that need it, and you can't give it away to the disenfranchised. So these farmers had to grow crop after crop after crop of fruits and vegetables for months and months, and after each grow cycle, they had to dispose of the entire thing. Every crop they grew, they had to throw out over and over again for months. Meanwhile, all of this was happening while homeless relief was being canceled and homeless shelters were being shut down across North America. Our people were in need of food and simultaneously were throwing out thousands of tons of perfectly good food every month. This cycle completely destroyed our food security, and really the restaurant industry has not recovered since. And food now is so expensive from inflation, it's unprofitable to own a small business dealing in food products anyways. Restaurant owners can't keep employees because they can no longer afford to pay them a living wage. Meanwhile, there are less customers because people can't can't afford to eat out anymore. Grocery stores are affected by current food prices as well. Profit margins are so thin, now only the biggest stores can survive. There's no way that somebody didn't know that this would happen. In some places, there were no programs to alleviate this, no subsidies for farmers, no promise to get food to inner cities. I don't remember seeing an outcry to get food security during a time of crisis. In some places, people went hungry and the food industry imploded, and everybody just let it happen. Some illogical decisions made during the lockdowns only allowed large businesses to survive, and a lot of mom and pop shops died off. Of course, this happens every time there's financial crisis. But the loss of these food services has negatively affected many communities. Then there's the issue of food storage. How long can we reasonably store food before it goes bad? Well, a lot longer than you probably think. Expiration dates on food packaging is not always very accurate. Tons of perfectly good food gets thrown out every week just because somebody arbitrarily decided on a date to print on a label. We simply do not value food properly in this culture. That's the point I'm trying to make here. Our culture around food is totally broken. Food is not really seen as a right or a precious commodity. Why does everybody just accept this? But there is no food security for individual farmers either. A significant percentage of farmers are exploited by mega corporations. There was a time in the United States, for example, where seeds were given to farmers for free to ensure that America was well fed. And they did this hoping to create a community of cultivators breeding a wide variety of hybrids and variations of what have now become our favorite fruits and vegetables today. Now it's standard to use breeds of engineered seeds from brands like Monsanto. But you have to sign a contract when using corporate seeds, promising not to replant those seeds from the fruits and vegetables grown when you cultivate them. So essentially they're forcing farmers to buy new seeds every season. If you have not signed a contract to grow Monsanto seeds and your crop is seen to have Monsanto DNA, well, Monsanto will sue you for stealing their seeds. Even if you grew those seeds yourself using their seeds, they can still sue you. These corporate seeds are patented. Every DNA sequence is patented. Monsanto seeds are only designed to thrive using one herbicide, Roundup, a Monsanto-developed product. A glyphosate herbicide. So if you want to use Monsanto seeds, then you must use Roundup to protect them. And if you want to use Roundup to protect your crops, then you have to grow Monsanto seeds. Through control of seeds, corporate distributors have farmers in a vice grip and are one of the core reasons that our food is so expensive. Again, this is just in the United States. I'm not really sure what's happening in Canada, but I'm sure it's totally cool and awesome. But we need a free seed program again. We need to reinforce our farmers again. We could be living in a world where food is plentiful and inexpensive. We could be living in a world where we celebrate abundance in the food industry. But instead, we punish the people who provide us food. When you boil it down, what I'm really saying here is that the food availability issue at its core is the result of an engineered food environment. And that's just the food that we can control. I haven't even mentioned the food cartels yet. There are farmers who have their lives on the line in the service of protecting their crop. And there are entire families that have been hijacked by organized crime. This is an issue in several countries, but some of the food that you love came from the exploitation of farmers. For example, Americans love avocados, but a lot of the avocados that end up in the United States come from cartel-controlled farms and pipelines in Mexico and Middle America. Farmers are often forced to serve a local crime lord who shaves their profits. And then there's the issue of food fraud, where organized crime has laced and replaced a lot of our food with counterfeits. Fake meats, fake spices, often containing contaminants in place of their advertised product. Counterfeit food is a lot more prevalent than you might think. Wasn't there that whole Swedish meatball thing one time? Forget about it. Like I said, said, people don't really think much about where their food comes from or how it makes it to their plate. Regarding global warming, cutting meat from our diet technically will reduce greenhouse emissions. That is true. Less cattle means less greenhouse gases. Simple. But something like that would only actually really serve to buy us a little bit of time. It wouldn't actually solve the carbon emissions issue. With the amount of coal and oil being burned by power plants in cars, cattle are barely an issue in comparison. In the last 50 years, for example, car use has exploded exponentially, but the number of cows that stayed relatively the same. And today, cars create about 3 times as much greenhouse gases as cattle. So removing cars would be a way more important step than removing meat. We need to stop burning oil and coal today, like now. Right now. But the important difference between biological methane and carbon and the carbon emitted from gas and oil is that cattle can only release methane into the atmosphere that already exists in the environment, meaning cattle cannot create new methane and carbon. If anything, by joining the natural air cycle, they've become a new source for carbon and methane to be stored instead of the environment. But with oil and gas, you're adding new carbon to the atmosphere every single time you burn oil. That oil and coal that you're burning would have otherwise remained below the surface of the earth and never would have been released to the environment. So every time you drive a car, you're being worse than a cow. What? That's an actual line in my video? In my video about the banks, I explained that roads are a lie because they represent a perpetual debt that our cities can never pay off. And for that reason, cars are a lie because roads only really exist to force us to buy cars to get around. And cars only really exist so that the bank can trick us into making another monthly payment. Cars are just yet another necessity that's not really necessary. Cities are insane for food distribution. Most people living in cities do not live within walking distance of fresh fruit or vegetables. When people live in a condition like that, it's called a food desert. People who live in food deserts are much more likely to get their food from convenience stores or fast food restaurants. Eating like this is very bad for your health, obviously, but also bad for your mental health because it makes it much more difficult for you to regulate. You're much more likely to be irritable or depressed. And let's be honest, public transit is garbage, so most people living in a food desert need access to a car to get to the grocery store. Food security does not really seem to be considered in city planning. Grocery stores are not respected as necessary in our culture. And now, with only the largest stores surviving, store placement is just another byproduct of capitalism. Cities are too big, obviously. But people often argue that farmland used for cattle farming should be turned back into wilderness. But the funny thing is that a lot of those cattle farms were already mostly grassland anyways. Land for ranches used to be chosen for how perfect they already were set up for cattle. And the wild animals that lived there were deer, rams, bison, buffalo, which would have already been grazing the land and would have already been producing methane. A while back, I remember watching a piece about the return of an iconic grazing animal to the Canadian prairies. The bison. A lot of these places had not seen bison for over 100 years, and the effects of their return on the environment were astounding. The mere presence of bison brought the prairies back to life. The act of the bison eating the grasses and fertilizing the land made the plant growth much more lush, and a stronger environment meant that more animals could thrive there. Multiple species returned to the prairies because of the presence of the bison. Also, many native communities depended on the buffalo to survive, and with the death of the buffalo, they could no longer sustain themselves. But this even goes for today. Why shouldn't we be allowed to go out and kill a buffalo? A single buffalo would have had enough meat to feed a family for over a year, easily. For the price of one bullet, your family could eat for a year. In the end, all of those large grazing animals were killed off so that they could be replaced by domesticated cattle. Domesticated animals that are pumped full of hormones and antibiotics, whose waste destroys the environment. They contaminate the water, they kill off the local wildlife. The problem is not meat, the problem is not animal products. The problem is industrial farming. The tradition of hunting is not honored like it used to be. They don't want us hunting, finding our own food, providing for ourselves, connecting with nature, being self-sufficient. No, they want to control nature and control the food supply to force us to buy their meat, where a single steak costs more than it would to hunt an entire buffalo. The suburbs and suburban life as we know it only really existed for about 70 years. The suburban lifestyle is still really new and is truly unsustainable. After World War II, the suburbs were normalized and were promised as the ideal lifestyle. Well, the commodification of meat is one of the effects of the suburban lifestyle. The commodification of meat is also a very recent phenomenon in the West. I don't think that a lot of people really understand the urgency of some of the subjects that I've talked about here. People don't even really want to acknowledge that there's a problem at all in a lot of cases. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is another one of those things where people think that it will get fixed if they just wait long enough. And all those bad things, they're gonna happen later. I gotta be that guy again that says all those bad things that you were told are gonna happen later, well, they're starting to happen now.